Thank you for coming. In this presentation, I want to share an overview of a very big topic: male-female relationships, ancient teachings about those, the ideological struggles in our own time, and what science has to say about marriage, sex, parenting, and the well-being of children. In many ways, these are complex, painful topics, and I'm just touching on the surface of some very big issues. I hope that you'll gain a few new insights about these very important challenges that all of us have to deal with. I look forward to hearing your thoughts and feedback. I do have a warning. This presentation is not intended for children. Also, I have good news and not so good news. Which one do you want to hear first? I think Karen wants to hear the good news, but I'm going to give you the not so good news, okay? All right, so let's get started here. Part of the gender wars includes the sexualization of children in the schools. Here's a screenshot of a video showing the sexually graphic content of books removed from the Florida school libraries. Schools used to be a refuge from pornography, but no longer.
The material is so nice. Joanne's company make cheese, another company. Kinseyan, another company. Joanne's is very weak, but another one is strong. I can speak it. I just did it really.
So why would parents of toddlers bring them to watch a drag queen performance like this? Here are parents and students at PS 96 Elementary School in East Harlem attending a talent show who were exposed to a surprise drag show that they were not informed about. This social conditioning of children is not something that most parents expect or want. Several commentators warn that this normalizes adult-child sex. Our culture has declared that for our youth, there is no time for innocence. Limits on sexualized adult interaction with children are being erased in plain sight. 21st century institutions in the United States, like the American Library Association, have embraced the fluid sexualities of ancient pagan religions by promoting grown men in dresses to read children's stories to young children who are sitting on their lap. First, let's go back a few thousand years. Ishtar in Mesopotamia, and the name in Egypt was Astarte, was the goddess of war and as well the goddess of sexual love and fertility. Ishtar, aka Astarte, was the protectress of prostitutes and the patroness of the alehouse. Part of her cult worship included temple prostitution. In the parades of ancient religions, there were masculinized women and feminized men. Parades in the 2nd century included men dressing as women, were described by the Roman historian Apuleius. The gods of the Near East ancient religions engaged in sexual relations. Given the activity of those being worshipped, it's not surprising that those cultures approved of sex of men with men, women with women, adult sex with girls, adult sex with boys, and with animals. In the ancient Near East and elsewhere, virgins were deflowered by priests prior to engaging in relations with their husbands. Ritual prostitution using barely adolescent girls was almost universal. On the right, you see the Greek god Zeus, who's portrayed as raping a woman, Proserpine. In the middle is a relief showing bestiality, meaning sex with animals. On the left is temple prostitution in India. The first sexual revolution took place more than 3,500 years ago. It was when Judaism de-sexualized God in its statement, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." God created not through any sexual behavior, but as an act of his will. This was a radical break with all other religions, and it changed human history. So in Genesis 1:27, it says, "So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them." What does this statement in Genesis 1:27, that human beings are created in the image of God and that he created them male and female, mean? First of all, that human life is sacred. It also implies the goodness and, of course, the reality of male and female identity. Judaism placed limits on sexual activity. It could no longer dominate religion and social life. It was to be sanctified, which in Hebrew means separated from the world and placed in the home, in the bed of husband and wife. Judaism also banned child sacrifice. This makes sense, since if observant Jews reserve sex for marriage, then the children born are not just a result of random sex with a stranger, but rather children born to a man and a woman who are committed to each other and looking forward to having children together. And of course, this teaching was spread by the Jewish Messiah, Jesus, to what became the entire Christian world. America is a nation founded by believers in the Bible, in which sexual interaction with children or with family members other than your spouse is condemned and banned, not taken for granted. This had the effect of protecting and raising the status of the wife and of the children. So now I'd like to read from a passage from Leviticus 18. "None of you shall approach any one of his close relatives to uncover nakedness. I am the Lord. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your father, which is the nakedness of your mother. She is your mother. You shall not uncover her nakedness. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your father's wife. It is your father's nakedness. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your sister, your father's daughter, or your mother's daughter, whether brought up in the family or in another home. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your son's daughter or of your daughter's daughter, for their nakedness is your own nakedness." And it goes on in a similar fashion. Basically, God's command is that there be no sexual relationships with family members or relatives, or of men with men, or of women with women, or with animals, etc. We have more information about this topic in a video that we created called Good Sex, Bad Sex, which we'll be posting on the Freedom, Faith, and Family Rumble and YouTube channels. Now let's fast forward to the ideological attacks on the family in the West in the 19th and 20th centuries. As shown in this statement by Karl Marx in the German Ideology, written in 1845, he viewed the family as the first institution of property, where the wife and the children are the slaves of the husband. Just as private property must be abolished, the nuclear family, with its claim of love and obligations, must also be replaced. Engels later wrote that when communism established, the nuclear family would cease to be the economic unit of society. Housekeeping would be the responsibility of paid workers. The care and education of the children would become a public affair, not the concern of the parents. After the Bolsheviks took over the revolutionary Russian government in October 1917, they forbade religious instruction to anyone under 18 years of age, and children were encouraged to turn in their parents if they taught them about God or did not comply with other government directives. Pavel Trofimovich Morozov, better known as Pavlik, was a Soviet youth praised by the Soviet press as a martyr. His story, dated to 1932, is that of a 13-year-old boy who publicly denounced his father for hiding wheat from the government officials who enforced state control of the food supply. His father was found guilty on corruption charges and sent to prison. Pavlik, in turn, was killed by his family. Monuments to Pavlik Morozov were erected across the Soviet Union. He was listed in the Soviet Youth Pioneer Organization as Pioneer number 001, an example of absolute loyalty to the state for all youth to follow. The sexualization of children, with toddlers encouraged to crawl on top of grown men dressed as women, is a modern form of indoctrination, some would say grooming. In Columbus, Ohio, government authorities forced parents to give up legal custody of their daughter after the mother and father said that they opposed the girl's decision to identify as a boy and transition to being, quote, male. County Job and Family Services took legal custody of the teenage girl who was 17, who, according to the court records, suffers from gender dysphoria. In many parts of the U.S., the law is that the state can seize control of a child if the parents do not agree with the government's ideology. I was recently speaking with two women who are public school teachers in Massachusetts. They told me that the school districts have received a lot of funding to promote the diversity, equity, inclusion agenda, so teachers are forced to teach curricula which emphasize racial and gender disparities. Students know that they can accuse a teacher of being racist, biased, or insensitive. If they do so, it leads to the teacher being investigated. So many teachers keep their mouths shut and teach what they're told, even if they do not agree. If a student is being disruptive, they have to consider, the teacher has to consider if they will be accused for being insensitive or biased. In the first decades of the 20th century, an Italian communist, Antonio Gramsci, realized that the worldwide uprising against the upper classes, based on economics alone, had not caught fire. The West was not vulnerable to a revolt of the trade union workers. Gramsci theorized that if communism achieved, quote, mastery of human consciousness, then active revolution would be unnecessary. Mastery over the consciousness of the great mass of people could be attained if communists or their sympathizers gained control of the organs of culture, quote, churches, education, newspapers, magazines, the electronic media, literature, music, the visual arts, and so on. In 1915, he wrote that socialism is precisely the religion that must overwhelm Christianity. In the new order, socialism will triumph by first capturing the culture via infiltration of schools, universities, churches, and the media by transforming the consciousness of society. Cultural Marxists like Herbert Marcuse, who emigrated from Germany in the 1930s to America, advocated an attack on Judeo-Christian values, which they saw as the basis of capitalist civilization. In his book, Eros and Civilization, which was widely read on college campuses in the 60s and 70s, including, I read this as well in college, he discusses integrating the ideas about class revolution of Marx with the psychological insights of Freud. Marcuse wrote, Sigmund Freud's proposition that civilization is based on the permanent subjugation of the human instincts has been taken for granted. What he means that if human desires are not subjugated, then that would be the key, that would be the way to undermine civilization. In other words, promoting sexual freedom is a way to weaken Western society and to build a liberated, non-repressive society. He also developed the anti-war slogan, "Make love, not war." Another influential thinker and writer of the Frankfurt Society, Erich Fromm, spoke about weaponizing sexual desire to weaken society. He wrote, libidinal forces become free for new forms of utilization and thus change their social function. Now they no longer contribute to the preservation of society, but lead to the building of new social formations. They cease, as it were, to be cement and instead become dynamite. In 1948, Alfred Kinsey, who taught courses on sexuality at Indiana University, published the 800-page Sexual Behavior in the Human Male. He claimed that 30 to 45% of Americans' husbands had extramarital affairs, that 70% of men had sex with prostitutes, that 37% had at least one homosexual encounter, and that 10% had been exclusively homosexual for at least 3 years. He became an instant celebrity whose scientific findings revealed a shocking reality about the sexual behavior of American men and boys. 5 years later, in 1953, he published Sexual Behavior in the Human Female. It was 842 pages with 179 tables and 155 figures. So it was an impressive book. And his findings included nearly half of women had sex before marriage. More than 1 in 4 had extramarital intercourse. In other words, committed adultery. Nearly 4% had had sex with an animal, and that women who had premarital sex and at an early age made better adjustments in marriage. Although shocking, since this was from a respected scientist who did graduate work at Harvard University and taught courses at Indiana University, many Americans concluded that his findings about the real sexual behavior of women were also authoritative. It was later revealed that 25% of his research sample in the report about male behavior were prisoners. Kinsey's team actively sought out the worst sex offenders at prisons for interviews. The book's discussion of pre-adolescent male sex activity was based on detailed notes from a voracious pedophile named Rex King, a federal forestry employee, also known as Mr. X. Mr. X had engaged in sex with 600 pre-adolescent male children, 200 female children, and animals of many species. He masturbated infants for hours and sexually penetrated the children. This, of course, was fraudulent research, but it was effective as propaganda to mislead the American people. Some scientists, including the respected psychologist Abraham Maslow, warned that his methods were not scientific, but the media paid little attention to his concerns. So this was propaganda, not real science. It was also later revealed that his book, Sexual Behavior in the Human Female, minimized the negative impact of adult-child sex. It excluded adult females who had been in prison for prostitution or drug use, because including them would have revealed the link to those illegal activities with higher rates of having been sexually abused as children. It classified as married women who had lived with the man for over 1 year, even if not faithful to that man. Thus, prostitutes living with a pimp for a year or more would be considered married. Only 23% of the women were asked if they had a history of sexually transmitted diseases, since asking all of the women would have revealed the connection of STD infections with higher rates of premarital or extramarital sex. This was propaganda, not real science. Kinseyan propaganda was the basis for value-free, supposedly scientific sex education at colleges and high schools that proliferated in the decades that followed. In the 1980s, the author George Leonard attended Human Sexuality 101, a 15-hour course given monthly at the National Sex Forum in San Francisco. This training, based on the idea of sexual attitude restructuring, includes many hours of watching pornographic images and sounds of human beings and sometimes animals engaging in every conceivable act. Leonard interviewed Dr. Maggie Rubenstein, leader of the weekend session, who said, this is a quote, "Human Sexuality 101 is about sex. It's not about love or romance or intimacy. Love is a different matter. I love my friend, my dog, and my fish." Courses based on the same Kinseyan assumption that human sex is solely physical or recreational, divorced from emotional, moral, or social considerations, spread to college campuses across the country. Dr. John Santelli, who teaches at Columbia University's Mailman School of Public Health and who worked at the Center for Disease Control for 13 years as a researcher on adolescent health issues, testified that he would not support education that encourages youth to delay sexual involvement, even if it was effective, because it included moral concepts such as, quote, making a commitment and being responsible. Even when all of these concepts are essential to They're essential to successful, just, and equitable relationships between men and women who engage in sexual intimacy, and for any children created through their sexual union. In Kinseyan sex education, discussing self-restraint, commitment, the benefits of marriage and monogamy are seen as a violation of the norm-free universe its advocates want to create. Planned Parenthood is the largest provider in the United States of the Kinseyan model of sex education that has little to no discussion of love, commitment, marriage, and parenting. Sometimes Planned Parenthood curricula does include discussions of abstinence, which they redefine to include mutual masturbation, watching pornography, or taking a shower together with your partner. The International Planned Parenthood Federation has published a youth manifesto that focuses on the rights of all young people at any age to engage in sexual acts regardless of what their parents believe. When they say that all young people have the right to enjoy sex, is there any discussion of the downsides? Not much. Parents and authority figures are portrayed as ignorant or wanting to punish young people by depriving them of this enjoyment. All young people are told that all they have to do is use a condom and all possible negative consequences are gone, which of course is a lie. Unfortunately, this kind of two-dimensional propagandistic sex education is being forced through the United Nations and the USAID agency on many nations around the world, with threats that if they do not spread this to their youth, financial aid will be cut off. Let's take a look at some of the young people who've been, quote, liberated, not, by Kinseyan Planned Parenthood type sex education. Dr. Alan Waltzman, a Brooklyn psychiatrist, commented, quote, I see girls, 7th and 8th graders, even 6th graders who tell me that they're virgins, but then they've had oral sex 50 or 60 times. On a Dr. Phil show devoted to the subject of oral sex, a 13-year-old girl looked into the camera, tears streaming down her face, and said to other kids who might be watching, quote, don't do this, please don't do this, you will lose all your self-respect. Things will get worse for you, much worse. Another trend among unmarried singles is friends with benefits, where the idea is just have sex with no feelings involved. One 15-year-old named Sienna described the rationale for friends with benefits this way. Neither of them liked the other. That's so common now. It's nice because they don't have to worry about getting hurt feelings for each other. You're drunk or horny, the guy wants some, the girl wants some, and you don't have to worry about hurt feelings. Morgan, in her first year at George Washington University, had a series of sexual encounters. She depended on alcohol to get ready for boys, and afterwards when things did not work out. Her grades were failing, putting her at risk for losing her scholarship. She had several sessions with a psychiatrist who prescribed an antidepressant that made her groggy. While she admits that, quote, I've dug myself in a pretty deep ditch, she sees no reason to change much of her behavior or to question the commitment-free sex script that she and many of her friends are following. Of course, in an arrangement for uncommitted sex without feelings, the question is, who benefits? According to a survey by the Independent Women's Forum, 83% of college women say that marriage is important to them, but 40% still have hookups or so-called friends with benefits. So there's a lot of contradictory behavior. Heather, a 19-year-old studying performing arts at UCLA, enters the Office of the Student Psychological Services. She's been experiencing moodiness and crying spells. She explains that, quote, since Thanksgiving, I've had a, quote, friend with benefits. And actually, I'm kind of confused about that. I met him at a party and I really like him, but there's this problem. I want to spend more time with him and to do stuff like going shopping or to see a movie. That would make it a friendship for me. But he says no, because if we do those things, then in his opinion, we'd have a relationship, and that's more than he wants. And I'm confused because it seems that I don't get the friend part but he still gets the benefits.